My name is Martha Cameron, and I'm with the Climate Action Committee of Brooklyn for Peace. So tonight we have two speakers, and each speaker is going to speak for about 15 minutes. Our first speaker is Marilyn Elie. She's also a founding member of Indian Point Safe Energy Coalition, and she is definitely a BFP kind of organizer. She's a grassroots organizer who is grounded in the local struggle, but whose perspective is informed by and linked to a network of similar struggles that are going on around the country and around the globe. So let us welcome our first speaker, Marilyn Elie.
Thank you so much, Mark. So what I'd like to do is unpack this big issue of Indian Point. Indian Point, you hear a lot about it. It's 2 reactors. It's on the Hudson River. Most people think of it as just one big circle, but it's more complicated than that. So what I'd like to do tonight is to give you a way to think about it with 4 words. And those 4 words are waste, water, Wall Street, and weapons. Because under those 4 things, which are really not that hard to remember, you can begin to have a framework to understand the connections and what's happening there and how it plays out with almost everything else in our energy. Waste, water, Wall Street, and weapons. Radioactive waste is why I got into this, looking at Indian Point 20 years ago. I was a school librarian, and here are all these kids walking through my door every day. And as I was active in my life and doing activist stuff, I started thinking about the radioactive waste that was building up at Indian Point and what we were handing on to these children. We were handing them something that they will have to deal with, their children will have to deal with, and their children's children will have to deal with. Every bit of spent fuel, and that's what they call it when they take it out of the reactor, that was ever used at Indian Point since it opened almost 40 years ago, is right there on site. And it is stored in a pool. It's under 40 foot of water, but the building is like commercial construction. It's like a Kmart building. It is not hardened. Hardened is the word they use for the reactor building. The spent fuel is so much more dangerous because there's so much more of it. It has been racked and re-racked and re-racked. That is, it's been moved closer and closer and closer together so that the plant can continue to operate. There is a partial solution for that, and that's called dry cask storage. And what the company, it's very expensive, of course, and what the company is doing now is they take out just enough of what they call cooled fuel, spent fuel that's 5 years old and is not quite as radioactive. So they'll take out just enough, put it in a cask that is about a quarter as big as this room. Big, huge, concrete, they're round. You can see them on a Google Earth map if you're curious. And that lets them take out the fresh fuel, put it in the spent fuel pool, and continue to operate. That's how they're doing bit by bit by bit. So the waste that accumulates there is going to be toxic and deadly for 240,000 years. Some people say, well, we'll just send it away. There is no more away. We've used it all up. Yucca Mountain is dead. People keep trying to revive it. But then that brings up questions too. Is it fair? Is it democratic to send this fuel to some place where people don't want it? What they're talking about at Yucca Mountain is land that's sacred to the Northern Shoshone. And they vowed to fight. They are not nonviolent. Now, I don't know how that would ever play out, and hopefully we will never find out. But to put this kind of burden, first of all, you make a mess with the uranium mining and do all kinds of damage there. You get the good out of the fuel once it's processed, because we're right in the middle of the fuel cycle. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then you're done with it. You've made your mess. So you want to ship it back to the people that you really wronged to begin with? You know, that's not right. Kids learn better than that in kindergarten. You know, you clean up your own mess. And should we have a place to send this, which we don't, you have to think about the transportation and the trucking and all that. It would take 20 years by rail and by highway to take all of the waste that we have right now to put it somewhere. The current plan is that, okay, we'll move it to basically a parking lot, somewhere out in the desert, somewhere that's remote, somewhere where we don't have to worry about it. And if you scratch the surface of that argument a little bit, what you'll get is people who are very down the road thinking, this is really not waste, this is a resource. People who want to get into recycling. Not reprocessing. Don't ever let them tell you it's recycling, because it's not. Reprocessing and making even more of a mess. So I just kind of want to inoculate you against that whole idea of reprocessing spent fuel. And if you have any more questions about that, please let me know. We'll talk about it. David Lockbaum is with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and he is a world-class expert on, he's not anti-nuclear, but he's on making nuclear plants safer, and he really has been at odds with the NRC for a long time. I'd like to read you one quote. "The industry treats spent fuel as if it were benign. It is not." And I think from what I've just said that you can see some of the many different ways that it is not benign. It needs to stay where it is. The communities that have used it need to take responsibility for it. How that can possibly happen, what can happen to it, is such a conundrum. We need to stop making it. We need to stop producing more. We need to corral what we have and figure out how to keep it where it is on site. Water. Water's a big issue. Water's a huge issue with any kind of electricity generation, and my time's half up, so you'll hear more about water and maybe not so much about Wall Street, which is fine. Indian Point uses more water in one day than all of New York and Westchester can drink. It's huge. It is the biggest user of water in the state. 40-foot pipe is the intake. Why does it need all this water? It needs it to cool huge, big pieces of machinery that get really hot and have to be cooled down. So the intake, 40 foot coming in, takes in a lot more than just water. It also includes all of the marine animals and plants and everything else. The eggs, if you ask the company, they'll say, well, you know, they're just fish eggs. They have no commercial value. They're too small. The babies are too small. However, think about the food chain. Those are the things that are at the bottom of the food chain. You wipe out the bottom of the food chain and you change the whole ecology of the river. And that is exactly what Indian Point has done. The company is using a public resource, our heritage Hudson River. They're using it for commercial gain, and they're giving us back water that is 20 or 30 degrees hotter than when they put it in, which is also another barrier for fish that are spawning or migrating. And they're saying, oh, well, you know, it's fine, it's water. We take it out and we put it back. Again, you have to kind of look beneath the surface of that beautiful, broad Hudson River. There are 13 species of native fish that are now threatened or endangered because of the changes that power plant and others have made in the river. That's one of the things about water, and it's one of the reasons that you will find power plants located on water. Again, there's a solution on bodies of water, and to think about what they do to them is not dissimilar from Indian Point. One of the things that could be done is that we could go to what is called closed cycle cooling. Again, it's a big expense, and the company has been fighting it tooth and nail. Our Department of Environmental Conservation is currently, hopefully, winding down hearings. I'm hoping that they're at the end of their process for that. And if we could go to closed cycle cooling, we would save 95% of the water use and 97% of the aquatic life. Okay, let me see quickly here. Electricity is a commodity, and if somebody tells you we can't replace it, they're just wrong. We have a free market economy. We have lots of ways that we can replace the electricity from Indian Point, and it doesn't all have to be in generation. It can be conservation. It can be efficiency. And there are many, many generators in this state, 320 some, that would be very happy to sell more of their electricity. And we do not use that much electricity in the New York City Westchester grid from Indian Point. It's sold elsewhere. Where is it sold? Well, we can't tell because it's proprietary information, and they won't tell us. So we don't know. But if you look at the amount that is purchased by contract, 560 megawatts from Consolidated Edison, that is only a very, very small fraction of the 13,000 megawatts that the city grid uses on a regular basis. So replacing Indian Point is no big deal, no matter how many commercials you hear, or no matter how many signs you see at the ball games. Entergy is very good about lying. New York State is working on two different things. One is the New York Energy Highway, which would really help our grid, and we could move electricity from upstate to downstate. The other you'll be hearing a lot about, because the governor is very enthusiastically behind it, is REV, the Revised Energy Vision for New York. Amy Levins, if you don't know Amy Levins, you should. Look him up, Google him, go to his Rocky Mountain website. Because his ideas are behind REV, and some of the people that he has worked with are now working with the governor and the Public Service Commission to say that we need distributed generation, small generators all around where it's going to be used so we don't have to send their electricity so far. It's one really good thing that could happen and make the grid more stable. I won't talk to you about the evacuation plan really, because you don't have one. Only those of us in the 10-mile area have an evacuation plan. But I would invite you to contemplate the fact that we are, Indian Point is 34 miles from Times Square. How far are you from Times Square? Not that far. Nuclear neighbors make very close, nuclear power plants make very close neighbors of us all. Should there be a catastrophe there, you would be affected in ways that are just hard to imagine, depending on which way the wind blows, either more or less. But you would also be finding people flying to flee the area. And where would they come? Well, they're going to have to head south, because that's the way the roads go. And nobody's going to want to go north past the plant if there's a catastrophe there. So that's something that needs to be included, and I hope that there will be more talk in New York City about evacuation and planning, just like you do for floods. What would happen should there be a catastrophe at Indian Point here in Brooklyn? What I would like to do is leave you with some questions that I have been thinking about. First of all, the world is awash in plutonium. And it's one of the deadliest substances on the face of the planet. Helen Caldicott says that it will become, and it has become, ubiquitous in the environment. You can find traces in the Arctic and in the Antarctic because of the weather, because of the currents, because of the wind, because of the water. This is not something we want to be ubiquitous in the environment. And yet we have so much of it, we don't know what to do with it, and we keep making more. That makes no sense. It just simply makes no sense. And is this the technology we really want to be using, or do we want to find something that we can, and if we're using it, how can we say, oh no, you people over there can't have it? You know, it's just for us because we can take care of it. Well, we know better than that. But it's just such a selfish thing. Why not use cheap, clean, green electricity that we can export to the world, that we can share? Electricity that it doesn't poison the planet and kill us all, or have the possibility to do that. And that brings me to my last point. First of all, electricity is but a fleeting byproduct of nuclear power. What we are left with is a mess that is eons long and more expensive than anything that could ever be, is ever considered. And the per kilowatt hour price of the electricity it generates, the companies get the profit, we get the cleanup as taxpayers. How fair is that? And And it's just immoral on so many different levels that, and it's easier to say that here. It's easier to say that here in this situation, in this gathering, in a religious place than it is to say it out in the world. But I've been practicing that because I think that that is something that the nuclear industry has no recourse to. I think that if we can just look at them and say, what you are doing is immoral. It's immoral for the mess that you're making that lasts so long. It's immoral for future generations, and it costs way too much money. $19 billion for one plant. Where are you getting that money from? Are you taking it from food stamps? You know, where is this the way as a society we want to spend our money? I don't think so. So I think that working together, looking at all of these different connections, we can really support REV. We can support the Energy Highway. We can talk to our neighbors. We can talk, and like everybody here knows how to do, certainly Martha does, show up and do things. And working together, we can really shape a successful energy policy. And New York can generate so much energy from distributed generation that we could export it. We can generate more than we could possibly use. And it could be clean, and it could be green, it could be inexpensive, and it could be good for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. And I think raising the moral issue is very important.